So this started on TikTok. I was sitting on a forklift at work waiting for a truck to back into the dock. And like most people who are trying to kill a few minutes, I was mindlessly scrolling through TikTok. The first video was about a place called Crybaby Bridge. Nothing unusual there. I've heard these stories before. Then another video came up. Different town, different bridge, different state, same story. Then a third video. Then a fourth video. 4 different creators, 4 different Crybaby Bridges, 4 different towns, and every one of them claimed that their bridge was the real one. And I remember sitting there thinking, there's no way that there's this many postpartum tragedies involving mothers throwing their babies from bridges. Statistically, it just doesn't make sense. Surely there had to be another explanation, and that's when I remembered something. Years ago, when I lived in New Carlisle, Ohio, we had our own Crybaby Bridge too. Back then, I never questioned it. It was just one of those stories everyone knew. Someone would bring it up around a bonfire or while driving around on a Friday night. And before long, someone would inevitably say, "Let's go." And at the time, I thought it was just another local ghost story. I had no idea that hundreds of towns across America were telling almost the exact same legend. So I started digging, not to prove whether the bridge was haunted, not to debunk people who believe it. I wanted to answer a different question. Why does almost every small town seem to have a Crybaby Bridge? And as I started researching, I realized I wasn't investigating a haunted bridge. I was excavating something much older, a story. So what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, or if it's your first time, welcome to the channel. My name is Andrew, and today we're taking a look at what's called migratory folklore. The easiest way to describe migratory folklore would be the telephone game. You guys remember the telephone game from when you were kids. You would start off on one end with one story, and by the time it came back around, it would be completely different. That's kind of what migratory folklore is in a nutshell. Like there's nuance to it, obviously, but Crybaby Bridge is a prime example of it. It starts in one town. Somebody hears the story and they're like, "Oh, this sounds like this sounds like a bridge near me," or, you know, it just passes from person to person to person, from town to town to town, to state to state. It just keeps spreading. It's always the same story, almost. There's like 4 different stories that float around, but that's just migratory folklore. That's what happens with it. So this video has been a couple weeks in the making. I didn't realize how much research I was going to end up doing. So this is going to be like a part 1 to all that. Anyways, if you like what we're talking about, you want to help support the channel, the new YouTube algorithm relies heavily on the like button, so smash that like button, just bury it completely. I want it gone. And subscribe to the channel. Leave me a comment down below. Let the algorithm know that you are watching the content, and I will try to keep up a more regular pace. But anyways, let's get back into this. So if you've never heard of the story of the Crybaby Bridge, you're about to realize you've probably heard it a dozen times. It always starts the same way. Somewhere outside of a town, there's an old bridge, and it's not in the middle of the city, not on a busy highway. It's almost always tucked away on a lonely country road, usually surrounded by woods, usually crossing a creek, or a crick if you're from the holler, and almost always somewhere teenagers like to drive after dark. Then comes the story. Depending on who's telling it, a young mother either lost her child in a terrible accident or deliberately threw the baby from the bridge. Some versions say she was driven mad by grief. It's like the Appalachian version of La Llorona, to be honest. Others say that she was abandoned by her family. Some insist it happened because she was ashamed of having a child out of wedlock. Others claim it wasn't murder at all, that a car plunged into the creek during a storm, trapping a family beneath the water. The details change. Sometimes it's a newborn, Sometimes it's a toddler. Sometimes the mother died too. Sometimes she survived and spends eternity searching for her children. But every version ends the same way. If you visit the bridge late at night, you can still hear the baby crying. That's why it's called Crybaby Bridge. And that's also where the ritual begins. Because Crybaby Bridge isn't just a ghost story, it's an experience. Every generation seems to invent the same challenge. Pile into somebody's car, drive out after dark, stop in the middle of the bridge, turn off the engine, kill the headlights, roll down the windows, and sit quietly. Wait. Some towns tell you to flash your headlights 3 times. Others say you should honk the horn. And I've even read versions where you're supposed to sprinkle baby powder across the hood of your car. Others insist you'll find tiny handprints on the trunk before you leave. The rituals are almost as varied as the legend itself, but they all exist for the same reason, to make the story feel real. Because once you participate, you're no longer just hearing the legend, you're becoming part of it. And that's exactly how folklore survives. Not because somebody wrote it in a book, not because it's a historian recorded it, but because one generation takes the next generation to the bridge. Then they tell the story. Then those kids grow up and take someone else. The legend doesn't need proof. It only needs another storyteller. When I lived in New Carlisle, Ohio, we had a Crybaby Bridge there too. At the time, I never questioned it. It was simply one of those places that everyone knew about. If you lived there long enough, somebody would eventually mention it. During a late night drive, maybe after somebody asked, "So, do you want to go somewhere creepy?" Nobody ever started with, "Here's the documented history of this bridge." They started with, "My cousin went there. My friend heard the baby. My uncle swears it's haunted." That's because these stories are passed along. They're inherited. But here's where things start getting strange. After seeing those 4 TikTok videos, I started searching. I expected to find maybe a dozen Crybaby Bridges. Instead, I found hundreds. Ohio has multiple Crybaby Bridges. Indiana has them. Kentucky has them. Michigan has them. Pennsylvania, Texas, California, Illinois, Missouri, Florida, North Carolina, Washington, and the list just kept growing. Different bridges, different rivers, different towns, different victims. The exact same legend. That's when I stopped asking whether any particular bridge was actually haunted and started asking something much bigger. How could this story exist in hundreds of different places? Where were the hundreds of mothers who threw their babies from bridges? Did hundreds of communities somehow experience nearly identical tragedies? Or was I looking at something else entirely? Because statistically, that explanation just doesn't hold up. If every town insists their Crybaby Bridge is the original, then most of them have to be wrong. But if they're wrong, why are the stories so similar? That's where this investigation stopped being about ghosts and became something much more interesting, at least to me. It became an investigation into folklore itself. And you guys know I love me some folklore. Because maybe the thing that's haunting these bridges isn't a ghost. Maybe it's just a story. One that's been traveling across America for generations. Changing names, changing bridges, changing towns, somehow never dying. That's it for part 1. If you guys enjoyed this, let me know down below and I will start working on part 2. I've got the spec script written out now. There's still more research to get into, but I'm going to get on it. But anyways, let me know down below and I hope you have a nice day. Peace out.